really fascinated. I mean, you've touched on this, and I'm glad because I'm fascinated by this notion of what the author brings to the story and how much of it is autobiographical. And I think back even when I was in advanced placement English in high school, that the big paper that you had to write was read the biography of a famous writer and read the magnum opus, and then write a paper that, you know, teased out how real life and reality impacted the fiction. And of course now that's even more complicated because we live in a culture that's absolutely driven by this notion of reality. And of course we all know that on television a lot of this reality is actually fiction. So,
you've lost your way, haven't you?
no, I haven't.
Okay.
No, here it is. Here's the big enchilada. Why as a piece of fiction is this story important for you to tell as a writer?
You mean
Susurrus.
Susurrus?
Think about that and tell us.
I have no idea.
It's a tough one.
But I wouldn't be able to answer that about any of the pieces that I make. I think in many ways I'm the worst person to answer a question like that about you know, why the piece you know, has to be made or has to be told in the way that it's told, because it's something that, you know, even for someone like me who you know, approaches their work, compared to a lot of artists, I approach my work from a very intellectual standpoint, and you know, and I have a PhD and all of that. That even for me, that those sort of instinctive decisions are still a very large part of that process, and it's very hard to know. For me, I always say it's kind of like saying to somebody, you know, how did you know what you wanted to have for dinner? And you go, I think, you know, and they say, what thought processes went into you knowing what you had for dinner? What process led you to knowing what you had to? And you feel slightly embarrassed, and you go, I can't really say. I just was really in the mood for pizza. I don't know, you know, and so it kind of feels like that. And obviously, you know, it's more complex than that. There's, you know, there are ideas behind it that I want to convey. You know, sometimes a socio-political exploration of particular ideas, often an emotional exploration of things. You know, I very much want to make work that gives people a strong emotional experience. Having talked about coming from that sort of performance art background, which often is very sort of cerebral and thoughtful, and is kind of, in many ways, is made for other artists or academics to kind of, you know, be aware of the way in which you've moved the form forward. I also wanted to make something where people felt moved by it, you know, because that's what I look for in the work of art. That, you know, I had a very interesting kind of epiphanal moment a few years ago where Callum and I spent Christmas. We were supposed to go on holiday for Christmas, and it was the Christmas after he'd nearly died, just to give you a context. And we thought we would be able to go on holiday at Christmas, and the day before we travelled, the doctor said that we weren't allowed to go, and we were like, no, it'll be fine. And they said, no, you know, you're still not in good enough health, and if you became ill while you were away, you would just die. You wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't be able to help you. So we very reluctantly stayed at home. We kind of toyed with the idea of just going, let's just go anyway. But we stayed at home very unhappily. And my friend Cora invited us to have Christmas with her family. And this is not really all that relevant, so, you know, remember that. And while we were chatting, I think on Christmas Eve, suddenly Cora's father said, right, okay, everyone, the 3 favorite films, go. And Cora and my partner Callum and I all chose 3 films. And when we talked about it later, we realised that we chose 3 films that were very similar. Cora is a singer and an actress, and she chose 3 musicals. I think she chose Grease, The Wizard of Oz, and West Side Story, I think. And Callum, my partner, chose 3 kind of bittersweet comedies, which I pointed out were all about suicide. I think we had The Apartment. I can't remember the other 2. And I chose 3 very emotional film narratives that are about theatre. I chose Les Enfants du Paradis, Cradle Will Rock.
All About Eve.
No, it wasn't All About Eve, but that is a really great film. And that's why I want the festival in New Haven to do Sub Rosa in the Schubert, because of all that.
Already.
And what was my third film that I chose? I can't remember. Anyway, but all of them are, very big emotional films, and they're very much driven by character and, emotion and conflict. And I thought, what am I doing, wasting my time making this work? Where I'm going, yes, I really want to, ask the question, what is theatre? And blah, blah, blah. When actually, what I really want when I go to a work of art is to have a big emotional experience. I want to come out feeling like I've been run over by a truck. Mm-hmm. And so why am I wasting my time trying to make work where people will say, well, I thought there was very interesting reference to Baudrillard's theory on simulacra, and so that was quite an epiphanal moment for me, as an artist, that it gave me quite a strong sense of mission in each of the pieces that I make. Saying, actually, will people feel moved by this when they leave? And, not necessarily feel like they've been run over by a truck, but sometimes, with Sub Rosa, certainly, the aim is that people will feel very distressed by it, which it certainly succeeds in. We often have people fainting in Sub Rosa, and we did actually hospitalise someone a couple of weeks ago. More on that story later.
You'll be happy to know that is not the first time it's happened at a UMS presentation.
Oh, really?
We had someone pass out and have to be taken out of the theater at Deborah Warner's Medea.
Of course.
So you actually do know, and
Yeah,
you answered the
Yeah.
question. I mean, it's.
But actually, I think it's very deeply. It's so deeply rooted that it feels like an instinct,
Exactly.
rather than an intellectual process.
Yeah. It's really more about a desire to create an impact on the viewer or the participant, and less about the specific story that's being told. That's very interesting. One of the things that I loved about the piece, I was asked to answer why we would bring this to Ann Arbor to open our season with it. And I think that, for me, first of all, congratulations, because I think that you are 100% successful in your endeavor, because when it became clear to me, the British Council called after I had seen Susurrus in Edinburgh and said, we're sending David Leddy to the U.S. to do site visits. Would you be interested in having him come to visit? And I said, absolutely. When can he be here? And the reason for it was that I had such a large and indelible emotional memory of having experienced the piece in Edinburgh. And I knew some of the themes, and I remembered some of the detail of the story, but it was so profoundly about the emotional impact of the experience. And so here you are. I think the other thing I loved about the piece so much was the way in which it makes conscious for the participant that which we're rarely conscious of when we go to the theater, and that is we are equally responsible for creating the experience that we have when we go see Medea in the theater. But we're rarely aware of that. And this piece is all about, in some ways, at least the experiential part of it, about making you aware of it. And we've even this week had a couple of wild experiences with people who've already gone through, where I think Mary on our staff had a dead sparrow fall out of a tree at just the right moment in the piece. There's a lot of sparrow imagery and metaphor in the piece, and dead sparrow. And so it's really shocking, the role of serendipity in this piece as well. Do you care to talk about that anymore? Comment on it?
I think you've probably covered it all already.
Sorry,
No,
I'm
it's okay.
sorry.
But yeah, I do think, I was talking to somebody about it the other day who was saying, well, I think this is a much more, much more active process for the people in the audience than it normally would be if you were, just watching, a regular play. And I disagreed. I think that actually it's that process of watching, watching Medea or watching, Death of a Salesman or whatever, is still a very active process that actually, the play has no meaning of its own. It's just, a garbled load of noise until a member of the audience comes and listens to it and interprets it. And even if that interaction is only that they decide that they don't like it, or wondering what the piece is trying to say to them and they think the piece is saying something that's not worth listening to, that's still a very active mental process to engage in. And I think the difference here is that that's put into the foreground, where normally that's allowed to rest in the background. But I think that process is there in all pieces. And obviously, this is written to have a great deal of textual detail and a lot of references to A Midsummer Night's Dream. I think there are more than 40 quotations from the piece, and all of which are in the book that you can buy if you want to. And so I think you need to know as a writer that you need to have all of those things ready to go. You can't have something that's that doesn't have that amount of detail for people to because no one's going to get all of them first time round. So there need to be enough of them that they can kind of make those links as they go along. But I do think that process is something that we go through every time we interpret any kind of text on any level, whether that be a visual text or an oral text or whatever.